If you were to look at Payton Leutner in this photo, you probably could never guess that behind those happy light blue eyes, there lies a memory more traumatic than any of us will ever fathom. She was only 12 at the time when her two closest friends invited her to play hide and seek in the woods. In short, 3 girls walked into the woods together and only 2 walked out. Payton wasn't one of them, going in and out of consciousness after being left for dead. She miraculously managed to stumble out of those woods to immediately collapse onto the grassy shoulder of a path, bleeding out quickly. She needed her next miracle fast. My name is Killian, and welcome to True Crime Stories. Slenderman is an awkwardly tall, abnormally thin, faceless humanoid creature. He is pale white, and his exaggerated limbs have surely been calculated to be as eerie as his creator imagined. Top that off with a black suit, and if that's not creepy enough, he can project black tentacles from his back, mainly for snatching children and children only. He lives in a mansion in the woods where he will take his victims. He also has a sickness that is highly contagious. Just being in proximity of him will infect you. You will first have a nosebleed, then you will have nightmares. You will wake up drenched in sweat from pure fear, but relieved when you realize that it was just a dream. Only that's short-lived when a severe paranoia takes over your every thought. Eventually, this slender sickness will turn you into a killer for the Slenderman himself. And I really hope I don't have to tell you that this Slenderman is not real. Because if I did, then you would be mentally unstable, just like Anissa Weier and Morgan Geyser. The images and storyline of the Slenderman became very popular on internet forums such as Creepypasta, and for 2 6th graders from Waukesha, Wisconsin in 2014, it became more than just a story. And here we must talk about another bit of troubling Slenderman lore. So if Slenderman has you in his sights and you are a kid, you are as good as dead, unless you can give him another child to sacrifice. Then you, and in some cases your family or loved ones, will be spared, as this would appease him. A 9-year-old Morgan Geyser would stumble onto the Slenderman stories in her many traverses through the internet's scary story forums. And the Slenderman, he just hit different. She was completely fascinated with him. She would go to school and, with a bit too much excitement, scare the living shit out of the other 9-year-olds. Eventually, it became common knowledge that if you talked to Morgan, she would be compelled to tell you more about the Slenderman. Unfortunately, every kid would stay away from her as if she was the Slenderman herself. Ostracized by her peers, she ate her lunches alone, walked alone, and simply sat and watched the other kids play. This is when Payton, who had always been a little bit sweeter, a little bit more empathetic than the other children, would notice the awkward little girl sitting alone every day. She went over to talk to Morgan, and they became friends. A little backstory on Morgan Geyser. Her father was severely schizophrenic, which strained the family greatly as he was in and out of the hospitals most of the time. Her mother would have to pick up the slack and become Superwoman. But even Superwoman had only so much time in a day. Morgan found herself for most of her childhood having to entertain herself. And that's how she found herself on the internet, unsupervised, viewing and reading what most of us would consider adult-based content. And of course, when Morgan met Payton, she would tell her all about the Slenderman. And as odd and grotesque as Payton would find these stories, she still liked Morgan. They somehow found that happy medium between an unruly child and a wholesome goody-goody, and they became best friends. But that happy medium, that delicate balance of friendship they had, would go off kilter when Anissa Weier would turn the duo into a trio. Payton and Morgan were still best friends, that was clear, but Anissa had the same dark interests that Morgan coveted, and the two would grow closer and closer because they also lived in the same apartment complex and would soon sit next to each other on the bus to and from school together. Their conversations about the creepy corners of the web would eventually land them on Slenderman. One night, the girls would plan a sleepover, and it would be safe to say that Payton began to feel a bit of separation from Morgan now that Anissa was in the picture, because all they would talk about were the morbid things they were consuming on the internet, their main topic being that of the Slenderman. So technically, Payton was forced to learn all about it, and the way the girls would tell it made it so real for Payton that afterwards she needed to be comforted by her own mother because it scared her so badly. Her mom had to reassure her that there was no such thing, that there was no boogeyman out to get her. But once she found herself with her friends again, Slenderman would be brought up, and it appeared that their interest had now turned into a full-blown obsession as they wanted to learn everything about Slenderman. Payton, of course, was sick of hearing about it because not only did the stories frighten her, but she was beginning to have nightmares about them. Yet, she cared about her friends, so she just let them tell their silly stories because, as a normal, sane person, how was she supposed to know that her best friends believe that Slenderman is real? It's like telling someone that Santa is real. They just think you're joking. What she was actually entertaining was her two friends' break from reality. May 30th, 2014. Morgan is celebrating her 12th birthday with a fun-filled day with her two friends and ending it with a sleepover. But there was something out of the ordinary in comparison to the many sleepovers they had in the past that would stretch into all hours of the morning. Once the girls settled in, Morgan said her goodnights and went to sleep. Anissa would follow suit, leaving Payton a bit confused, but she just figured that it was a long day and that the birthday girl was simply tired. Payton would wake up the following morning to find the two girls missing. She would find them in the computer room, whispering amongst themselves. They would tell Payton that they had woken up early and didn't want to disturb her. Morgan informed Payton that a walk in the park today sounded so nice because of the beautiful weather. Payton agreed. After being driven to David's Park by Morgan's mother, the three girls walked around enjoying the new day. And this is where Morgan would suggest that they play hide and seek. And this would also be a good time to warn you about the gruesome scene that is to come. Your discretion is advised. Well, you can't play hide and seek in an open field, but luckily, this park had a wooded area. Morgan volunteered to be the first to seek, so she covered her eyes and began counting as Payton and Anissa ran into the woods. Once a good distance away from Morgan and deep into the trees, Anissa turned to Payton and said that she had a great idea for a hiding spot. Now this part gives me the chills every time. Anissa tells Payton to lay on the ground and she begins to cover her with leaves. So eventually, she was entirely covered. She could no longer see, but she could hear the crunching of footsteps as Anissa ran away. She laid there in silence and unmoving so as not to give away her position to Morgan, who had since stopped counting. The anxiousness she must have felt when she heard Morgan's footsteps closing in. And a bit of confusion when she noticed a second set of footsteps. The crunching of leaves would stop right next to her. Suddenly, someone jumped on top of her, pinning her arms down and sitting on her, still not being able to see what was happening. She panics and begins frantically struggling to break free. Flailing her head, she was able to knock some leaves away and she realized it was Anissa that was holding her down. And then she completely went cold when she turned to see Morgan pull a large knife from her backpack. Payton's screams were muffled as Morgan was now helping Anissa to restrict her movements. Morgan leaned over and whispered into Payton's ear, "I'm so sorry," and began stabbing the poor girl on every exposed part. Arms, legs, chest, in total, 19 stabs, and even one directly to the heart. Once Payton stopped struggling, the two girls got off her and looked down in shock. Oddly, it appeared that they were remorseful. They told Payton that they were going to get help and ran off. They had just stabbed her countless times, what is most definitely a premeditated plan. So yeah, not much of what they said held much weight. With an immense will to live, a need to make it back to her family and loved ones, she stands up. She staggered her way out of those woods and immediately collapsed onto the grass, but expiring quickly. But fate was on her side as a cyclist just happens to ride by, spots her, and calls for help. So, I've told you about two miracles. One being her will to drag herself out of those woods. Two being the passing cyclist. Now let me tell you a third. After 6 hours of emergency surgery, it was discovered that one of the stabs did hit her aorta, which was the main artery carrying blood away from the heart. Any severe damage to this was guaranteed death. Although it had been cut just a millimeter more, a hair width more, and Payton Leutner's story would have ended in those woods. Regardless, major damage was inflicted as her liver, stomach, and diaphragm were punctured, causing problematic internal bleeding. But because of amazing medical care and multiple successful surgeries, Payton Leutner would survive and wake up from this nightmare. The physical recovery would be extremely long and painful, but the mental ramifications were arguably more difficult. And of course, the victim lived to tell the story, so the culprits would be identified. But the culprits in this case, Morgan and Anissa, they simply walked out of those woods. There was no panic, no rush, and no attempt to even hide what they had just done. When the police found them, they were a few miles away from the woods, in broad daylight, on a public street, covered in blood. Even the murder weapon, still stained with Payton's blood, was found inside Morgan's backpack. The girls never denied anything that happened, confessing to everything, and when the police asked why, their response was a matter-of-fact statement. It was a sacrifice for the Slenderman. In summary, we already know that it was Morgan that was completely obsessed with the Slenderman. She was able to convince the more impressionable Anissa of his actual existence. And as the Slenderman story goes, he has kids suffering from the slender sickness that kills for him. The term used for them are slender proxies. According to Anissa, Morgan tells her one day that they are proxies for the Slenderman and they needed a sacrifice. If they didn't, their families and loved ones would all be murdered by the Slenderman. Morgan told Anissa, because of this, that they needed to kill Payton. The Slenderman lore would also state that kids that killed for him were allowed to live with him in his secret mansion in the woods. It was speculated that when police found them that day, they were headed to the Slenderman's mansion, wherever that was. Now, before we get into the punishment, which has been a hot topic for debate in which you yourself can chime your opinions on, first let's go over the facts. The first thing we should consider are their ages, which is 12. We have the term tried as an adult for a reason, giving the courts the right to judge a person's age on a case-by-case basis due to circumstances such as severity. Both girls in this case were waived out of juvenile court and tried as adults. Anissa Weir pleaded guilty to being a party to attempted second-degree homicide. The jury would find her not guilty by mental or defect. She was sentenced to 25 years to life in a psychiatric institute followed by communal supervision until the age of 37. Morgan Geyser was considered the mastermind and Anissa was merely the lackey. She would be diagnosed with schizophrenia, just like her father. In her conversations with psychiatrists and interrogators, it was learned that not only did she believe in Slenderman, but she was seeing and talking to him as well. During the first interview, fresh off the vicious attack of her best friend, when asked if she felt bad about what she did, she responded, It was weird. I felt no remorse. I thought I would. I thought about it, and then I decided that remorse would get me nowhere. It's easier to live without regrets. I thought about being remorseful about killing my friend, but then I decided not to be. And when she was left alone in that room, she would start dancing. Taking into account the manner in which both girls were found, being that no thought or efforts were placed into hiding their tracks, it was interesting to learn that Morgan did have a sense of self-preservation, at least in the weeks leading up to the attack, because her internet searches revealed that she typed in how to get away with murdering someone. Morgan Geyser was sentenced to 40 years to life in a psychiatric unit until complete resolution of symptoms or until the age of 53. Continued communal supervision, periodic reevaluations, and if need be, reinstitution. Now, in the many cases that we've covered, I've been appalled many times, usually about the leniency of the sentencings for something as irredeemable as murder. But for this case, I think they got it right. Now, the first time I heard this story, years ago, I always had the impression that Anissa was just a weak-minded follower that happened to befriend someone crazy. Just know that Anissa never stabbed Payton, even when Morgan told her to, so there was a line that she wouldn't cross. She was now 19. She wrote a heartfelt letter to the courts and was released on September 13 of 2021. But she would be heavily monitored with 24-hour GPS. She will not be allowed to leave Waukesha County. Strict internet limitations with no access to social media whatsoever, which would probably be a good thing for a lot of us. She would also be required to take medication and regular check-ins with her caseworker for counseling. I wasn't able to find much else about Anissa after her release, which I would consider a good thing. What do you feel about this? I think it's fair. Now, as for the fate of Morgan Geyser, she too would also make an appeal to the courts. She wanted to be retried as a juvenile, but this was promptly rejected by the appeals court. Her lawyers tried to take it to the Supreme Court of Wisconsin in 2021, but they wouldn't even entertain looking at it. And that feels right to me too. I said it once before, the moment you take a life, crazy or not, you've just shown that you don't belong in a society with the good people. Sorry if you're damaged, buddy, but I'd rather not see you do damage to someone else only for the courts to say, oops, it's happened before, so you need to just stay there, Morgan. And now, our young victim in this story, Payton Leutner. After the attack, she struggled for years to rebuild back to her normal life. 5 years after the attack, she was finally willing to talk to ABC News in 2019. She was now 17. She said that she remembered herself being hopeful and positive before the attack, a champion for the underdog and very empathetic, according to her mother. But as you could imagine, she was very different after. Nightmares were a constant now. She would crawl into her mother's bed until it was basically her bed as well. She couldn't be alone without having a panic attack. She was just that scared. She still keeps scissors underneath her pillow, and socializing with people, that was out the door. Understandably, she wasn't able to trust anyone anymore. And sadly, that even included family members that were kept at arm's distance. And she knows that it's a battle with herself at this point. But in an interview, Payton says something that made me confident that she was going to be just fine. When asked if there was anything she would like to tell Morgan, she said, I would probably initially thank her. I would say, just because of what you did, I have a life now. I really, really like it, and I have a plan. I didn't have a plan when I was 12, and now I do, because of everything that I went through. I also liked her answer on what she thought about 12-year-olds being tried as adults. Adult crime is adult court. If they had stolen a candy bar, sure, that's a child. But you tried to kill someone. That's an adult crime. Payton is one smart cookie, and she knew what her calling was. She was attending college in the fall of 2020 as of that interview, pursuing a career in the medical field. My name is Killian. If you like the video, simply let me know with a thumbs up, a subscription, or leave me a comment. Now go protect the ones you love, and love the ones that protect you.